What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we have another very exciting deck tech video for you. We're going to be talking about a different pirates list, some different colors this time. We're going to be talking about Emerald Steel pirates. If you've been tuned into the channel for a while, you may have heard me talk about being interested in putting this deck list together for a while. I was kind of tweaking some things. It didn't end up being quite as pirate heavy as Ruby Steel Pirates, which has a lot of very good pirates in those colors. Ruby Steel Pirates is probably the way to go if you want to get the most bang for your buck in terms of having a ton of pirates in your deck. And if you want to check out that video, click on the link above. That being said, this deck list is really interesting, really doing something super different than what Ruby Steel Pirates is trying to do. So the way the whole deck plays is very different. I've been enjoying it a lot. I think it's fairly competitive. I don't know if it's going to be the next big tournament winner, but I think maybe with some additional tweaks it could get there. I think it's got a lot of good cards in the meta right now in these two colors. That being said, as always, big shout out to the Patreons for making the giveaways on the channel possible, and just for continuing to support my journey with Lorcana. I could not do any of this without you guys, especially being a new dad. It's huge to have that kind of support. So people who take the time, thank you very much. You mean the world to me. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about Emerald Steel Pirates. So I don't think this will be any surprise in the one drop list in a Steel Pirates deck especially, but we are on 4 Captain Hook, a 1-cost inkable, 1/2 stat line questing for 1, but he has Challenger 2, so he's going to be hitting for 3 into those other characters. He's going to be able to potentially take out things like Madam Mim Snake, Fox. He's going to be able to take out those bodyguards like Donald Duck, Simba, Baloo, etc. Particularly in the Baloo matchup, it's a favorable trade even though they're gaining 2 lore, but Captain Hook, still a great card as far as I'm concerned, even since set 1. Next up in the 1-drop slot, we are on 4 Diablo Maleficent Spy, a 1-cost inkable 1/2 stat line. I kind of like having this in a pirates themed deck because it's still a bird. You have the pirates and the birds, and it kind of feels like it goes along with the theme still. He does have a fantastic ability that's going to really help you in a lot of those matchups, particularly into something like Steel Song, where when you play this character you may look at each opponent's hand and he is going to be questing for 1. Looking at your opponent's hand can be huge, especially in the early game, because you're going to have an idea of what their play lines are going to be. Next up, moving over to actions, 1-cost actions, we do have 4 Fire the Cannons, a 1-cost uninkable action. Deal 2 damage to chosen character. It is uninkable, but I still think that's worth it. We're coming back around to a meta where a lot of the early game characters are in a position where they are going to die to Fire the Cannons, so I think Fire the Cannons is getting more value now than it ever has. Next up in the 1-drop slot, moving over to some locations. This was one thing with Ruby Steel Pirates, it wasn't as location heavy. Emerald Steel Pirates, you're going to see, is fairly location heavy. We are on 4 Hidden Coves, which may seem like too many. You've obviously seen those Emerald Steel lists where they're wanting 1 or 2 Hidden Coves a lot of times. I think 4 in this deck is the way to go. I think locations are really important to what this deck is trying to do, and having a very good 1-cost location is worthwhile, but it is a 1-cost inkable location, 1/6 stat line. Once you have a character inside of it, you're going to get +1/+1, so that's definitely super relevant to staying outside of the reach of certain damage spells, and potentially staying outside of the reach of things like Brawl, Madame Medusa, and the Big Sisu. Next up, this one is here to take advantage of in the short term when you play it. So this is not necessarily something you want to play on 1, it's something you want to play later when you can potentially get a location trigger out of it before it's removed, because with the Bayou, a 1-cost inkable location, it does only have 3 willpower, 1/3 stat line. It does net you 1 lore at the beginning of your turn, but I'd be surprised if it ever makes it around to a following turn, unless your opponent just has other things that they have to deal with on your board first. But whenever a character quests while here, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. It's a great way to filter out uninkables you may not necessarily want in some positions, but moreover, it's a great way to get those location triggers with some of your other characters. And the last 1-drop and another location, we are on 2 DeVille Manor. We really seen Neverland prove to be good in the aggro matchup when they're playing Amber. It is a 1/4 stat line as well, a 1-cost inkable location that nets 1 lore at the beginning of your turn. So 4 is pretty easy to out. It's not necessarily something you're going to want to see in the late game, but in that early game, it is a great way to put early pressure on your opponent. It's particularly good into anything playing Steel. Next up in the 2-cost slot, and I'm told one of the best cards in the meta right now, we are on 3 Calhoun, a 2-cost uninkable 3/2 stat line questing for 1, and during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, gain 2 lore. We're going to talk about a combo with that a little bit later in the deck, but Calhoun is very good, great way to gain some lore, has the ability of Robin Hood that we've seen be really good, has the same attack power as Robin Hood, has a much weaker defensive stat line, but since it's coming down for 2, still really good with that resist +1. Next up in the 2-drop slot, another uninkable. We need card draw with this deck big time, so dock is hugely important. We are on 3 docks, a 2-cost uninkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. When you play this character, you may discard your hand to draw 2 cards. As noted, as I've talked about with dock in the past, you don't need to have a hand to discard a hand, so you can discard nothing and draw 2 cards. Great way to continue to fuel your board with new threats, particularly when you're out of cards in your hand. Next up in the 2-cost slot, we are on 3 Ursula Deceiver, a 2-cost inkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. When you play it, you get to look at chosen opponent's hand and force them to discard a song if they have one to make them discard. Obviously very good against Steel Song, really good against anything playing songs. If you're in that Ruby matchup and they're running Be Prepared, wait until a little bit later. You don't necessarily want to play it on turn 2. Give them more turns to try to draw that Be Prepared into their hand and then sap it away with Ursula. Also sea themed, so I think she fits in with the pirate theme even though she's not a pirate. We are on 4 Mr. Smee, a 2-cost inkable 3/3 stat line questing for 2. Takes the damage at the end of your turn if you don't have a captain, but if you do have a captain, he is not going to take any damage. Still easily one of the best cards in the game, even with things like Calhoun out. The fact that he's inkable with this stat line and questing power is absolutely crazy. Next up in the 2-drop slot, only on 2 of these 7 Dwarves Mines, a 2-cost inkable location, earning you 1 lore at the beginning of your turn, 2/6 stat line, so 2 to move in, 6 willpower. During your turn, the first time you move a character here, you could deal 1 damage to a chosen character. If the move character is a knight, you can deal 2 damage. Doc is going to be the only knight to be able to take advantage of to potentially deal that 2 damage, but even dealing 1 damage can be really good to clear up threats. You can, with something that has 4 defense, for instance, deal 1 damage to it by moving a Calhoun here, and then use the Calhoun to take it out to be able to net that 2 lore. So 7 Dwarfs Mine can definitely be a little sneaky on your opponent, and if it's not going to be good in the position that you're in, it is an inkable card. Speaking of Calhoun and potential combos with her, we are on 2 Thebes, a 2-cost inkable location, 1 to move in, 7 willpower, and what's interesting with this is during your turn, whenever a character banishes another character in a challenge while they are here, they're going to go ahead and gain you 2 lore. So if you're banishing something with Calhoun inside of Thebes, you're going to gain 4 lore, which is crazy. You could potentially win by banishing 5 things with a Calhoun out of Thebes. So I do think that combo is pretty comical in certain instances. Could surprise your opponent, close out a game. They may see you have to deal with something on their board, and the next thing you know, you throw down a Thebes and you're dealing with the thing on their board and still gaining lore. Speaking of a great way to gain lore, we are on 4 John Silver Greedy Treasure Seeker, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 stat line questing for 1. This is going to be one of the reasons we are playing so many locations, is this John Silver. For each location you have in play, this character gains resist +1 and +1 lore. So he can get pretty nutty. You all of a sudden throw down 2 1-cost locations or 3 1-cost locations, and he's potentially questing for 4 with resist 3. Next up, back on the birds, we are on 4 Diablo Devoted Herald, a 3-cost uninkable 2/2 stat line questing for 1. Shifting by discarding an action card. You may have noticed we don't have a ton of actions in this deck, but we do play a couple. So you're not always necessarily going to be shifting him, may just be throwing him down, but we've got, I think, 8 actions in here to take advantage of shifting him. He is evasive, so he's going to be difficult for your opponent to out there. Obviously, the new Genie has made him a little less exciting because Genie is going to have a very favorable trade with Diablo, and during each opponent's turn, whenever they draw a card while this character is exerted, you may draw a card as well. So he is at least going to net you 1 card draw if you get him exerted right away. Next up in the 3-cost slot, moving over to an inkable, we are on 3 Donald Duck First Mate, a 3-cost inkable 2/3 stat line questing for 1. But while you have a captain character in play, he is going to be questing for 3, kind of similar to the ability we've seen on Piglet, Pooh Pirate Captain. So can definitely be fairly aggressive in the early game, which can be really good. We are only on 3 because we do have a limited supply of captains in this deck, but we do have some captains for him to take advantage of. And also, you don't want to draw him late game. He's less good late game. Speaking of captains, we are on 2 John Silver Ship's Cook, a 3-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line questing for 1. And when you play this character, chosen character can't challenge during their next turn. So this is another instance where maybe there is a major threat on your opponent's side of the board. You want to get some questing in with some of those weaker characters like Donald Duck that quest for a lot. Throw down this John Silver, say that big threat all of a sudden can't challenge next turn, and you're protecting your board quite well, and then he's potentially going to net you 1 more on the following turn as well. Speaking of the actions in this deck, we're on 7 total apparently. We are on 2 Let the Storm Rage On, and 1 Strength of a Raging Fire. So what these are going to do: Strength of a Raging Fire, a 3-cost inkable action song, deal damage to chosen character equal to the number of characters you have in play. So if you have a decent board out, Strength can be really good, but when you don't have a decent board out, you're more so going to want Let the Storm Rage On. Let the Storm Rage On is also letting you draw a card. It is a 3-cost uninkable action song, deal 2 damage to chosen character, and draw a card. So Storm Rage On, always kind of good, even though it's uninkable. Strength of Raging Fire, a little more situational. So we are on 2 and 1. Next up in the 4-cost slot, we are on 3 Daisy Duck Pirate Captain, a 4-cost inkable 3/3 stat line, questing for 2, and whenever one of your pirate characters quests, will add a location, draw a card. This is another reason we do have quite a few locations in here and quite a few pirates. If they are questing, we'll add those locations. We are going to be able to draw some cards with Daisy Duck, which can be huge in fueling this deck. We have very limited card draw here. We have the Diablos, we have the Let the Storm Rage On, and then we have the Daisy Duck. So we definitely want to be seeing one of those 3 things over the course of a game. She has an interesting stat line, being a 3/3, so she can potentially die to Medusa, but she can be really good if you're getting some value out of her when she's first hitting the board, within those first couple turns. And she does quest for 2. Next up, speaking of protecting some of those characters with interesting stat lines, we are on 2 Pluto Guard Dog, a 4-cost inkable 1/5 stat line, questing for 1 with Bodyguard. But while this character has no damage, he is going to get +4 strength, something we've seen be pretty effective in the meta with characters like Razul and Lawrence, particularly being a 4/4 for 3 when he has no damage on him. We've seen that ability be really good. Pluto is no exception. He has continued to be very good in the meta. He puts your opponent in a position where they can either 2-for-1 by playing a damage spell or attacking with 2 characters. They're basically having to sacrifice a card to Pluto, because most characters are going to trade with him. There's very few instances where they're just going to have a straight up favorable trade. So if Pluto banishes one of their characters, it's at least a 1-for-1. In some instances, they're dealing damage to it with something weak and then banishing it with something else, and that's going to be a kind of 2-for-1, a 1.5-for-1, because you're wasting a move on one of their characters and also banishing one. Same thing with them losing potential cards in their hand by doing direct damage to Pluto and then still having to challenge into it. It's gonna feel good, it's gonna slow your opponent down, and it's gonna be a pretty effective way to keep the game going. And that is the extent of the deck. Our max cost card is 4. We have a decent number of uninkables in the deck, but I'm pretty happy with it. I think this is the best way to play Emerald Steel Pirates. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below if you've got your own Emerald Steel Pirates list, or maybe if anybody out there has an Amber Emerald Pirates list. I've tried to build one, I can't really seem to get it going, but if anybody has any ideas on what could be a really good Emerald Amber Pirates list, I'd love to hear it. But please, as always, share your thoughts on this list in the comments below. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. Remember to slap that like button, it helps us out a ton in the algorithm. And if you haven't got subscribed, now's a great time to do so. Once we hit 3,000, we're going to be giving away another booster box, so slap that sub button if you haven't already. And remember, when you see those toys, video games, and awesome Wreck-It Ralph characters like Calhoun off in the distance, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.